Hello guys, my name is Lucas and welcome. Today we're going to be learning how to make an active skill that has a target. So in this case we're going to be making a push skill which is going to be applied on an enemy when we click on it, and it's going to push the enemy backwards a few units and also maybe deal some damage to it. Before we continue, I want to deeply thank all of my subscribers and especially those who support me on Patreon. It really means a lot to me, and I think I wouldn't be able to be making these videos if it wasn't for you. Thank you so much. Now let's begin with the video. So in the last episode we made the rage skill, which was an active skill, but it was automatically targeted to the player. Now we're going to make a skill which is going to be targeted on an enemy. And the first thing is that I created a little icon for us to use. It's a push icon, you can see it there. So it's like a punch or something. And I call it push. We're going to be using this. You can get your own icons, or you can download the project and use the one I made. So we already have the base for our skills. So we just need to duplicate. I'm going to copy here rage, and I'm going to paste it on the second slot. I'm going to reset the transform values, just the position, so it's over there in the second slot, and we're going to use the push icon that I made. Now we need to create the new skill script, which is going to be called push. So let's go to my scripts, skills, and let's make a new C# script and call it push. Make sure you type it right. Now we also want to open rage. Since both are active skills, they're going to be very similar, so we're going to copy everything from skill here all the way down, and we're going to replace all of this. So we should get something very similar to what we had with rage. And of course this is going to be different, so I'm going to get rid of this. We're still going to be using is cooling down because every active skill needs a cooldown, so we are going to keep this, and we're going to keep the cooldown routine because they are basically the same. Increased damage routine can be removed though, because we are going to be doing something different. And finally here on the start function we're going to replace the description with something different. In this case it's going to be push an enemy. Let's do the formula something like 2 plus skill level backwards and deal 50% damage, and the maximum level is going to be 5. So this is basically what the skill is going to do. Now we have a small problem with this, and is that when we use the skill something happens immediately, but now we have to wait for the player to click on an enemy that he wants to push away. So for that we're going to go to skill class, the base class, and we're going to create a new public function. I'm going to create it down here. It's going to be a public virtual void because we're going to override it from our push skill. Public virtual void, and we're going to call it use on target. So this is for active skills that need to be used on the target, and we're going to pass a transform parameter. Transform, and we're just going to call it target. And make sure you spell correctly. And we're just going to have it empty here because this is the base class. But now here in our push class, in our push skill, we can actually make the function for pushing our enemy. So I'm going to make a public override use on target, and now here we can push the target backwards. First we need to calculate the vector in which we're going to push the target. So for that we're going to create a new vector3 vector. So we want to push the enemy away from the player, so we need to use the player's position and the target position to calculate a vector that is going to go behind the enemy. Also, we only want to calculate this on the x-axis, since the y and the z might be different from the player, and we want to have a 2D platformer game. So the vector is equals to a new vector3. We are going to start with the y, which is going to be the target.y. And the z is going to be the target.position.z. And here on the x value, we are going to calculate with the player, which is player controller dot main dot transform dot position dot x minus target dot position dot x. There we go. So here we calculate, sorry guys, this should be target minus player controller dot main dot transform dot position dot x. So this is going to point behind our enemy, and we also need to normalize this so that this vector has a length of 1 unit. Now we're simply going to move the enemy in 1 frame. If we want to add an animation, we could either use physics or use iTween or make an animation, but I want to keep it simple, so I'm just going to teleport the enemy backwards. So we got target.transform, and in transform we have a function that allows us to move the transform backwards or whatever we want, and we just need a vector, and that's the vector we created. This vector is going to be multiplied, as we can see here on the skill description, is going to be 2 plus skill level. So we're going to do a 2 plus skill level, so that when we increase the level of our skill, the enemy is going to be pushed even further away. And we need to also set the space, which needs to be relative to the world. Otherwise, the enemy is going to move to its left. Let me make some comments. Move the target. Calculate direction in which the target needs to move. So before we actually call this function, we need to do a checking and check whether we're attacking an enemy or not, because maybe we're clicking on an NPC or something else and we're going to push it and it's going to be very weird. Although it could be a nice feature on your game, I'm going to keep it more traditional, and I'm just going to check if the target is enemy. And to do that, we just create an enemy controller, call it enemy controller, and set it equal to target.getComponent enemy controller. And if enemy controller is null, we are going to return. Now with this, we can make sure that we're only pushing enemies. Now the last thing we said is that we're going to damage the enemy for 50% damage. To do that, we're going to use the function getHit from enemy controller. Enemy controller getHit, and the damage is going to be half of the player's attack damage. So player controller dot main dot attack damage, and we're going to multiply this times 0.5f because we want to deal half damage. If you want to make it a more sophisticated formula, you could add skill level and multiply it, or do something that you like, but we're going to keep it simple in this video. Now the push function is nearly ready. However, you see that use on target is never being called. If we press F12, you see that there's no reference found to use on target. So when are we going to use it? Well, first of all, we are going to go to the player controller, and under combat, we're going to add one field, and it's going to be a public skill, and I'm going to call it selected skill. So when we actually press the hotkey to use our skill, we're going to store it here. So let's go back to push, and we say use it. We're going to find the player controller dot main dot selected skill, and we're going to store it here. So equals to this. Now when we use the skill, we're going to prepare it to be used on click. So if it's on click, we should go to the input manager, which is here, And here on get mouse button up, if you remember, is where we have the attack. Here's where we check if we're clicking on an eye clickable or not. So right here, we're going to check if the player has a selected skill or not. So if we have a selected skill, if player controller.main.selected skill is not null, that means that when we click on something, we're going to use the skill that we have selected. We know what we're hitting from this hit target here, so we're going to type player controller.main.selected skill, and since this is the skill that we want to use, we're going to type use on target, and the target that we're going to use it on is hit.transform. So use on target is going to check by itself whether it's a valid target or not. Then it's going to do on left click. Since we're using an active skill here, we are not going to do what we're supposed to do on left click. So else, and we're going to put that inside there. So we can do either this or this. And finally, what we need to do here in the input manager is go down here. And now that we have used the skill, or at least we try to use the skill, we're going to set this back to null. So player controller.main.selected skill is equals to null, so that we're not going to repeatedly use the same skill on different enemies or in the same enemy a bunch of times. Great. I think that's pretty much it. I think we can go and try it now. Let me quickly go by once. We use it and we're going to set the skill on the player controller. And once this player controller has a selected skill in the input manager, we're going to use the active skill on click when mouse click is released. So when we use it, we're going to select that skill and use on target on the transform that we are clicking on. When that happens, we go back to here, use on target from the push class, and it's going to calculate. So first it's going to check if it's an enemy or not, and then it's going to calculate a vector, it's going to push it backwards, and it's going to damage the enemy with half of the attack damage of the player. So I think this should work pretty well. Let's try it now. Oh, but before we try it, we of course need to assign the skill script that we just created onto here. So first of all, let's rename this skill. We're going to call it push. And we need to remove the rage component and add our new push component. And the icon is going to be the icon we just made. Skill level is going to be 1. And this cooldown time is going to be something like 5 seconds. So we can use this skill every 5 seconds. And that's it. Now we can try our push skill. So let me set my skills. I'm going to set my rage skill there. I'm going to set my push skill in the number 2. And now let's go and talk with the witch doctor to do the quest. Here. And now when we talk with the well, there's the mummies. And let's try, I press 2 so that I select the skill and I press on the mummy and it gets pushed back. Let's try it one more time. Press 2, click it, and it gets hit when it goes back, and then he comes back to me. And right now we can use it from any distance. So I keep pressing 2, and also, oh, where it is. Oh, it died because we're still damaging it. So it died. That's the correct behavior. That's what we expected. And the thing is here that, and it's a problem, is that right now I can push without cooldown. So the cooldown is not working, and we can push it from any distance. And I level up. So we need to fix those two things, and we're going to be ready. So first of all, why the cooldown is not working? So first of all, we should not be making the check here, because use is actually just pressing the hotkey. It's getting ready to use the skill, but we're not using the skill yet. We should let the player have the skill ready to use it as soon as the cooldown goes off. So I'm going to move this from here, and I'm going to put it down here, and I'm going to put it inside here in use on target. Now the next reason why our cooldown is not working is because we never started the cooldown routine. So if we didn't stop here and we didn't stop here, that means we actually went ahead and were able to do the function. We're going to start the cooldown. So start coroutine, cooldown routine, and we are ready to go. Let's try it one more time, and then we're going to fix the range issue. Let me use it with this mummy. I use push. You see it's cooling down, and we cannot use it. And then again, we push it, and it's cooling down. And it's cooling down until it's not cooling down anymore, and we can push it one more time. And there it goes. And did it die? It hasn't died yet. Or it died, yeah. So there we go. Now the cooldown is functioning. Now let's do the last thing, and is the range. So I'm going to add the range here. So range, let's make it private, float range. And we're going to set the range here on start. So range equals to, let's do something like 2. So now that we have this range here, we're going to do a checking here on use on target. So here we're going to check the distance from the target. So if vector3.distance target and the player controller .main.transform, can we use distance with 2? No, we need to use vectors. So position and player controller dot position. So if this distance is greater than the range, then we're going to return. And of course, you can always put all your checking inside one if statement and use or, and if any of them is true, then you're going to return. I'm just going to separate so it's easier for you guys to follow. Now that we have set the range and we check for it at the beginning of the use on target function, we should be able to test this one more time, and hopefully we're not going to be able to push the enemies if we're outside the range. There we go. I'm going to step away from the mummies. Going to select my skill, press 2, and try to push them. I pushed 1, and if I try to do it again, I cannot do it, but if I walk, I can push it. Let's make sure it's not a cooldown issue, so I'm going to wait here. The cooldown is gone. I'm going to press 2 again, and I press the mummy, and I'm not able to push it, but if I walk close, I can push it again and deal damage. And there we go. It's our first active skill on target that we make for our game. You can use the same concept to do all the kind of active skills like shooting or throwing a stone or healing your friendly units or debuffing your enemy units. That's up to you, that's up to your game design. Right now we know how to create active skills that need a target. So that's it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Again, please remember to subscribe and like this video, and hopefully share it with your friends. That would really help me a lot. On our next video, we're going to be learning how to use aura skills so that we can affect enemies nearby. And please let me know if you have any other questions or comments in the comment section below. I will see you all next time.